Muy buenas, espectadores de OK Diario. Hoy tenemos con nosotros al general Ben Hodges, que ha sido pues el máximo responsable militar, la máxima autoridad militar en los Estados Unidos durante muchos años en Europa, y con quien vamos a analizar la situación que se vive actualmente en Ucrania tras la invasión que se vive ya desde hace un año de Rusia en aquel país. General Hodges, thank you for joining us today. I would like to start asking you about the current situation in Ukraine. What is your current analysis of the Russia's war in Ukraine?
So there still are several months of really terrible fighting to go, lots of casualties on both sides, but I am very optimistic that Ukraine is going to win this conflict. We know from history that war is a test of will and it's a test of logistics. And Russia has suffered 6 times more casualties than Ukraine. They cannot replace their losses of equipment or ammunition. And they have so many problems. The hatred between Shoigu and Prigozhin, for example, the Air Force and Navy have not performed well at all. And so I think as Western aid continues to increase, I am confident that Ukraine will defeat Russia. It could happen this year if the West delivers everything that we said we would, and if the West decided we want Ukraine to win, not just survive, but win.
Mm-hmm. For example, Poland has recently announced the shipment of new combat aircraft to Ukraine. What consequences can this have, in your opinion?
Well, these are the kind of capabilities that Ukraine needs. We should have decided this a long time ago. But the key, as always in these things, is clarity of the objective. What is the strategic objective for the US government, the Spanish government, the German government, the British government? What do we want? And that's very difficult. It's hard for our elected leaders to give that sort of clarity. But if my president would say, we're going to help Ukraine win, we're going to help them defeat Russia and restore all of their sovereign territory, then all of these things, aircraft, long-range weapons, all of this would be happening. Instead, we have unfortunately made incremental decisions to provide capabilities to the Ukrainians. You remember a year ago, Poland wanted to give aircraft, and the United States would not support that idea. That should have happened a year ago. But at least now Poland is going to be able to do this. Poland, obviously, because of where they are on the map geographically, they understand what's at stake here better than maybe some others.
And do you think that the US will send military aircraft finally to Ukraine?
I think eventually, yes. But I don't understand why it's taken so long. The Ukrainians have demonstrated the ability to learn and integrate new technology faster than anybody I have ever seen, including our own soldiers. So it's not about their ability to learn. And we should have started training months ago, even before a decision to give aircraft. But the real capability that they need is long-range precision strike. That's how you defeat the only advantage the Russians have is mass, and you defeat mass by using precision to destroy headquarters, ammunition, and transportation. If you do that, then it won't matter how many Russian infantry there are.
Mm-hmm. But what about the potential risk of war escalation? Do you think that, for example, are there risks of nuclear threats by Russia?
I would say I take it seriously because they do have thousands of nuclear warheads, and they clearly do not care how many innocent people they kill. But I think there is almost zero chance that they would use a nuclear weapon because it gives them no advantage. President Biden has already warned the Russians that there would be catastrophic consequences if they use a nuclear weapon. I think the Russian general staff knows that they would have no advantage. And I also don't think that Putin is crazy or suicidal. And so I think it's just, there's even thinking in terms from a Russian perspective, as long as Russia itself is not threatened or attacked, they're not going to use a nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm. And according to you, which are the most probable scenarios that you foresee for this year in Ukraine?
So Crimea is the most important part on the map. That is the terrain that is decisive. Once Ukraine liberates Crimea, then everything changes. And I think the Ukrainian general staff knows this. They have everybody thinking about Bakhmut, where the Russians are being bled dry. In the meanwhile, I don't know this, but I think that Ukrainian general staff is preparing a strong armored force somewhere, giving it logistics and training and preparation to use in a different direction once the weather has made the conditions favorable for sustained land operations. And that will be used to break the land bridge between Crimea and Russia. And so that will lead to the isolation of Crimea. And then the Ukrainians can begin to make Crimea untenable for the Russian Navy, the Russian Air Force, and the Russian Army, using precision weapons so that the Black Sea Fleet would have to leave Sevastopol, the Air Force would have to leave Saki, and the big logistics base at Zhenkoy would be destroyed. That's what's coming, I think, by this summer.
Mm-hmm. Some analysts in the US are saying increasingly that the conflict in Ukraine should be resolved through negotiations. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think negotiations with Russia have to start with the understanding that they will never live up to anything that they say. They've never lived up to any agreement they've ever made unless there was a very strong compliance protocol in place. And I would never recommend that Ukraine agrees to anything that rewards Russia's criminal aggression, its commitment of war crimes, its imperialistic approach to seizing terrain from Ukraine. So negotiate, negotiate what? There are tens of thousands of Ukrainian children that have been deported. There are more than 70,000 war crimes allegations that the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, is looking at. There are countless violations of international law that have been committed by Russia. So when people talk about negotiate what? You tell Ukraine to give up Crimea or the Donbass? Well, let's ask Spain to give up, some part of its territory, or let's ask Italy to give up Lago di Como, or ask Germany to give up Bavaria. I mean, that's the nonsense of pressing Ukraine that they should give up some of their sovereign territory to Russia, in the naive belief that Russia would actually respect any agreement that they signed.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the predicted interview between the Chinese president Xi Jinping with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the other one, the conversation that will be held next week between Xi Jinping and Ukrainian President Mr. Zelensky?
So I think the Chinese are trying to find a way to get maximum advantage out of this entire conflict. I think the Chinese would like to see us, the West, fail, and they would like to continue receiving cheap Russian gas. But I don't think that they are necessarily such a huge supporter of Russia. They know that if they are openly providing weapons and ammunition and equipment to Russia, that they run the risk of U.S. sanctions, which will be a problem for China's economy. So perhaps they are looking for a way to be seen as brokering some sort of a settlement. But the 10-point plan that they rolled out a few weeks ago was totally infeasible, and it was not a plan. It was just ideas. So let's see. I think that it was important that President Xi told Russia a few months ago, do not use nuclear weapons and don't threaten the use of nuclear weapons. Russia is clearly the junior partner in this relationship.
Mhm. And in your opinion, is territorial control in Ukraine the most important dimension of the war's future for the United States?
Is territorial control?
By Ukraine, the most important element for the future of the war?
So Ukraine without Crimea will never be safe or secure. It will never be able to rebuild its economy because Russia will always block access in and out of Azov Sea, and it will continue to disrupt any traffic coming out of Odessa. And Ukraine's economy depends on export of grain and export of rare earth materials. And so without Crimea, Ukraine will never be safe or secure. And also, I think that the West, nations are going to be very reluctant to invest in Ukraine's rebuilding unless Ukraine has an ironclad security guarantee. And so I think the most important thing here is that Russia is defeated, that Ukraine wins this conflict and regains control of all of its territory and then has security partners.
Mm-hmm. And well, you have said before that the Russian invasion in Ukraine could end this year. So, it is in your opinion, do you see the end of the war before the presidential elections next year?
Before the American elections?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It could happen this year if the United States said, we want Ukraine to win. But they haven't said that yet. They talk about we want Russia to lose or we don't want Ukraine to lose. I mean, those are not clear strategic outcomes. And it is the job of my president to explain what is the desired strategic outcome. That's hard to do, but that's the duty, and they've got to figure out how to do that. And of course working with all of our allies and partners to do this staying together. I think that the administration has overestimated the risk of Russian escalation, that we stop ourselves. And of course, the Russians know this. They can see that all they have to do is mention nuclear weapons, and it causes us to halt. This is nuclear blackmail. And so they see this. China sees this. Iran sees this. North Korea sees this. Pakistan, anybody that has nuclear weapons or wants nuclear weapons, they're watching this. That if we are concerned about doing something because Russia might use a tactical nuclear weapon, that sends a terrible message to other countries. And so this is why I think it's important that the administration ignores that, and because it is so unlikely that they would actually do anything.
Mm-hmm. And in any case, for example, in the last days, we have heard some opinions by some of the American politicians about the kind of support to Ukraine. For example, the Florida's governor, Ron DeSantis, has said that the support to Ukraine is not a non-vital issue for the U.S. What is your stance on that?
Well, I'm from Florida. He's our governor. He has received a lot of criticism, to include from other Republicans, about that statement, and it demonstrated a real lack of understanding of foreign policy. But I think he said it because he's competing with former President Trump, and President Trump does have a core of supporters that believe that are what we would call isolationists. And so I think Governor DeSantis is making a political calculation right now. He's not ready to risk losing access to all the Trump core supporters. But I was at the Munich Security Conference last month, and I saw Senator McConnell, who was the Republican leader of the Senate, and he had a large congressional delegation with him. They are very, very strong pro-Ukraine, pro-NATO, pro-Europe. And so I think that like politicians in every country, including in Spain, leaders have to speak to domestic audience as well as international audience. And so I'm at this point, I'm not worried about what something like that Governor DeSantis said. And I think we'll see him try to have it both ways.
Mm-hmm. In any case, well, you have mentioned now Spain. Let me tell you that some European countries, especially, for example, Spain, they have stand to become a non-dependent Russian gas, to become one of it. For example, Spain has become one of the most important buyers of Russian gas. And from the beginning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the total amount of euros or dollars that Spain has spent paying to Russia, of course, has been larger than, for example, the total assistance for Ukraine in the military aspect or financial or humanitarian aspect. So what is your opinion on it? Because the case of Spain is not the only one in Europe. France, Belgium, and other ones are following the same path. What is your opinion on it? Because you are helping Ukraine, but at the same time, you are giving money to the Russian government.
Yeah. So, of course, this is up to the Spanish people. If that's, I mean, is that the direction that they really want to go? Do you want to be dependent on an authoritarian regime which murders thousands of people, innocent people, commits not only war crimes violations, but violates the sovereignty? All the things that the European Union says are important, all the things that NATO says are important, Russia hates all of those things. So this is a decision for the Spanish government and the Spanish people, as well as other governments. You're right. There are other countries that are doing this. And of course, we have gaps in the United States also. Well, I mean, there are still some connections with different places, and it is taking some time for all of us to disentangle these economic relationships that seemed like a good idea in the past. But I would say, look at Germany, how quickly Germany, of all countries, how quickly Germany was able to sever its dependence on Russian energy. So it is possible. And I think that the European Union has actually been very strong in its economic response to Russia. So again, this is for Spain, for the Spanish government to decide how it reconciles what you described with its values, with its requirements and obligations within the European Union, and its support for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. And our last question, speaking now about another geopolitical issue, about the relationship between the US and China. Some American analysts have said recently that there will be an open conflict between China and the US in a couple of years. So do you think that it could be happen?
It could, but it's not inevitable. It doesn't have to happen. I think China is watching very closely what we're doing with Ukraine right now. And if the United States and our allies are not willing to stick together and help Ukraine defeat Russia, if we are so easily deterred by the possibility of Russia using a nuclear weapon, if we don't have the willpower to stick together, then I think that sends a message to China that They don't have to worry about anything we say about South China. So what we're doing in Ukraine to support Ukraine is also about deterrence of China. Now, I think that of course, the United States and our allies have to make sure that we're prepared for conflict in the Indo-Pacific region. We know from history that that's the best way to prevent a war, is to demonstrate that you are prepared for it. Think of everything that Russia did when we failed to respond to their attack of Georgia. We failed to respond in a meaningful way to their invasion of Ukraine in 2014. And we did nothing after they supported the Assad regime using chemical weapons against his own people in Syria. So when you don't respond to that sort of aggression, it only invites more aggression. So the Chinese are watching this. And I think the risk goes up if we do not help Ukraine defeat Russia.
General Ben Hodges, thank you very much for being today here with us. Thank you for your time.
Jorge, thank you. It was a privilege for me, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.